You're listening to another No Fair Remembering Stuff, the Tuesday edition of the Professional Left Podcast, and available wherever you get your podcasts, and at our website, proleftpod.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website, or you could mail us a letter and or contribution at The Professional Left Podcast, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791.
And it's not safe for work.
And we should warn you up front that despite the fact that we're going to jump right into the sound of theologians fighting over the meaning of the New Testament's resurrection story, this is not an exegesis on the life of the carpenter from Nazareth because, 10 million, 100 million, a billion other books have been written about that already.
Yeah, and bear with us because this is a political story.
Yeah,
well, we're going to start by talking about theology and arguments.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an episode where we're trying to convert anyone to anything. As most of you know by now, when it comes to belief, we try to keep it very Unitarian Universalist around here. Believe whatever you like or nothing at all. But each, for our own reasons, are all cool with staffing the neighborhood diaper giveaway or helping out at the food bank or making blankets for homeless people. We're all in the mission for doing good.
Right. We're all on that same team.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start out with some audio from an outfit called Homebrewed Christianity. And for context, the person speaking is named Diane Butler Bass, who is a well-known progressive theologian. And she is talking to and also talking about her friend John Dominic Crossan, who is a very well-known theologian with a long and very interesting biography that we won't go into today. The subject they're talking about, the biblical story of the resurrection, is of less interest to us today than her evangelical colleagues' reaction to her opinions.
Some of the worst trouble I have ever gotten into in public arguments has been defending you two around the issue of the resurrection. I had a huge clash with Tony Jones of Emergent Christianity about Marcus's views of the resurrection. And then I had another big argument with Jim Wallace about some conversation that you and Marcus had with Jim Wallace about the resurrection. And Marcus used to talk about that up until about the day he died, about the misunderstanding in that conversation. And then when I've tried to defend the views that you present on social media, I've gotten in trouble. And in 2019, I guess it would have been right before you were at Santa Barbara, I got into a quarrel that was so substantial on Twitter that it got nicknamed Resurrection Gate. And I was canceled by hundreds and hundreds of people, including losing speaking engagements, because all of a sudden this word was out around the whole of mainline church that Diane Butler Bass didn't believe in the resurrection. Yeah. All of which was completely untrue, but nevertheless was made true by a weird quarrel on social media that was sort of kicked off by my defense of you and Marcus.
This is from her author's CV. Quote, Diane Butler Bass has had a conflicted relationship with evangelicalism over the last several decades. Early in her career, she was fired from the evangelical Westmont College, blacklisted, and ignored after she challenged traditional beliefs. She has written extensively about progressive Christianity ever since, and is the author of 8 books, including Grounded, Finding God in the World, A Spiritual Revolution, and most recently, Grateful, The Transformative Power of Giving Thanks, unquote. And this, from the Chautauquan Daily, is a very short version of what happened to her. Quote, Bass was fired from her dream job for doing nothing wrong.
Yeah.
At the time, she was working as a theology professor at an evangelical Christian college, Bass said the president of the university told her, quote, "You're an amazing student and an amazing scholar. I'm literally just firing you because you don't fit here," unquote.
Yep. And we went down that long road to bring us to a column by David French, published just a few days ago in the New York Times, where inexplicably Mr. French now has a job, presumably for life, writing about law, culture, religion, and armed conflict. Now, you might remember that we've talked about David French on this podcast before. Most people have heard that he was Bill Kristol's Never Trump Fantasy League choice to run for president in 2016. He was that guy nobody heard of that Bill Kristol said, hey, this guy should run for president as third party. He'd be great. David French used to be a writer at America's oldest journal of white supremacy, the National Review. The National Review, listen for it. It's going to come up a lot during this podcast because it is. It's the root of so much that has gone horribly wrong. We're going to talk about how he used that position to advance his many odious opinions, all of which grew out of his hardcore conservative evangelical quote-unquote Christianity. How once he ran afoul of the MAGA right on the issue of Donald Trump, they ran him the hell out of there. How he very hastily rethought some of his more medieval beliefs about women and gays and so forth so that he could meet the minimum requirements for reputational rehabilitation by the Beltway media. And how a job was then instantly found for him at the New York Times, because of course it was. Then a slot was found for him at the Bulwark, and an occasional chair was pulled out for him on cable news, because of course they were. And this week, the New York Times' new in-house expert on religion wrote a long column which begins as follows. Headline: "The day my old church canceled me was a very sad day." That's the headline. Here's the story. Quote, "This week, the leaders of the Presbyterian Church in America will gather in Richmond, Virginia for their annual General Assembly. The Presbyterian Church in America is a small, theologically conservative Christian denomination that was my family's church home for more than 15 years. It just canceled me. I am now deemed too divisive to speak to a gathering of Christians who share my faith. I was scheduled to speak about the challenges of dealing with toxic polarization, but I was considered too polarizing. I was originally invited to join 3 other panelists on the topic of, quote, how to be supportive of your pastor and church leaders in a polarized political year. One of the reasons I was invited was precisely that I've been the target of intense attacks online and in real life. The instant my participation was announced, those attacks started up again. There were misleading essays, vicious tweets, letters, and even a parody song, which I swear to God I didn't write. I swear to you, Blue Gal, it wasn't me, directed at the denomination and at me. The message was clear: get him off the stage. And that's what the conference organizers chose to do. They didn't just cancel me, they canceled the entire panel. But the reason was obvious. My presence would raise concerns about the peace and unity of the church, unquote.
Which prompted Ms. Butler Bass, the lady that we were talking about earlier, to respond to Mr. French on Twitter with the following, and see if this sounds familiar to you. Quote, "So, David French has never seen anything like it when his evangelical church turned on him. Welcome to my life for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
This is what evangelicals do, always. They cancel people. It just takes privileged conservative guys a while to notice, I guess. He literally just said there are churches where you can't be a Democrat. This has been happening for 30 years. Geez, he didn't know this? There are millions of people who have experienced this. Evangelicalism has ruined so many lives. Also, maybe he should memorize that Niemöller quote, 'First they came.' Finally, I am all for prodigal sons and deathbed conversions. If, however, your job is public commentary on religion, you shouldn't be so clueless."
Well read, Blue.
Unquote.
Well read, Blue Gal. Very well done. Beautifully done.
Does that sound familiar to any of you?
Or
it
all
sounds
of
like
you?
a Driftglass rant, fresh out of the pod.
Yeah, or Digby, or Blue Gal.
Yeah.
Or just,
Where have you been?
Where the fuck? And this is your area of expertise, right? This is
He's
your
been having
area of
drinks
expertise.
with Bill Crystal. That's where he's been.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really maddening. And until they kicked him in the metaphorical teeth and tossed his ass out of his own church, David French never noticed that his church was a nest of bigoted, hateful vipers. And it allegedly caught him completely by surprise when his church reacted exactly as anyone who wasn't in that particular cult could have told him they would react.
Mm-hmm. Just ask a liberal. I swear to God. So today, we're going to remember, because this is no fair remembering stuff, a thing that's been going on for a really long time, and that I started referring to as Republican detachment disorder or dry drunk republicanism.
Or as I have been saying it today, I didn't think Jesus would eat my face.
Jesus. Face-eating Jesus. My two terms, needless to say, did not take off like dumpster fire did, like my other term, dumpster fire.
Oh, yeah. Dumpster fire really took off with giving you no credit whatsoever.
It took off,
yes.
And my pockets are empty, people. My pockets are empty. I see that dumpster fire little sculpture, little plastic model up above Charlie Sykes' shoulder on MSNBC.
That's him trolling you. That is absolutely him trolling you. Yeah. Yeah.
But this, whatever it is, whatever you call it, it's been endemic among never-Trumpers since day one. They've quit the demon rum of the GOP, but they're absolutely incapable of quitting the vocabulary and the resentments and the deeply ingrained mental habits that a professional lifetime spent inside the hate radio, Fox News, evangelical right-wing terrarium has carved into their brains. It manifests itself with little things that you might not even notice unless you know what you're looking for. So take, for example, this February 13th, 2016 tweet from Republican strategist and public opinion molester Frank Luntz on the occasion of the South Carolina Republican debate, which was a shit show. Quote, this is Frank Luntz now. Seriously, this is insane. The GOP is destroying itself tonight, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Hashtag GOP debate, unquote. Okay. The key word here is they. The GOP is destroying itself tonight, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Now, by this point, Frank Luntz had been a greasy appendage of the Republican Party for 20 years. You might remember that he facilitated the caucus room meeting at the caucus room bar in Washington, D.C., among Republican leaders the day of Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration. This was the meeting that led to their policy of unrelenting obstruction and sabotage for 8 years. Give him nothing, stop him at all costs, and blame him for it all the time. And I guarantee you that during all that time, Luntz thought of himself and his party as we. But now, in 2016, in February, it was looking like they were committing suicide on national television, and suddenly the GOP was they. The GOP was those guys over there. Nothing to do with good old Frank Luntz. No. Frank Luntz is over here. He's one of the good guys. He's neutral. Now, here's a fun fact. Once Trump won, that same Frank Luntz began easing himself back into the good graces of the worst people in America, where he resides to this very day. But what Luntz did is fundamentally no different than the way the Republican base began ghosting the Republican Party and became the Tea Party after the Bush administration collapsed, because they did not want any of that mud to be splashed up on them. So they mentally detached themselves from the party to which they had devoted decades of effort, money, and time. Suddenly it wasn't us Republicans, it was them Republicans, those Republicans. We're the Tea Party. We're independent constitutional conservatives. Consider the case of Charlie Sykes that we've talked about on this podcast many times, formerly of the Bulwark and who still has a semi-permanent seat at MSNBC. Charlie Sykes is a lifelong, rabid anti-choice activist who suddenly professed to be completely stunned that the so-called pro-life movement that he had been promoting for 50 years had zero interest in the life or health of the mother or child once the mother had been forced by the state to carry the pregnancy to term. Turns out, it was all about controlling women, Blue Gal. Can you believe it? It was all about controlling women's bodies. If only someone had told him but it was too late. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he would have totally changed his position on his right-wing radio show.
Especially if a liberal had told him. Oh, man.
Right.
You know how those guys
that's all
are.
about controlling women. A liberal telling me that? How about a liberal chick telling him that? Right.
Or a feminazi even a feminazi. Mm-hmm.
This is from Politico, June 23rd, 2023. Headline: Thinkers from across the political spectrum reckon with the dramatic and unpredictable ways the country has already changed since the historic Supreme Court decision, meaning Dobbs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Sykes' contribution. Quote, as expected, the end of Roe galvanized pro-choice voters, dramatically changing the partisan dynamic in swing states like Wisconsin, and even in red states like Kansas. More surprising, however, were the rifts exposed within the pro-life movement and in the GOP itself. They had waited for this moment for 50 years, but when it happened, they appeared wholly unprepared.
And notice the locution of the sentence. They had waited, not us. They were unprepared, not us. All of a sudden, Charlie Sykes had nothing to do with those 50 years of anti-choice activism that he's now looking at as if he's a space alien who just landed here and is stunned at what's going on inside the Republican Party. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
That's all right. Was abortion now a state issue or a federal one? Should the ban be 6 weeks or 15? Or should it be absolute? Should there be exceptions for rape and incest? Should women be blocked from traveling across state lines to get abortion? Should abortion pills be banned nationwide? Should doctors be jailed? Despite having decades to think about a post-Roe world, pro-life Republicans splintered. There was no consensus on the thorniest issues and no consistent answers from GOP-controlled legislatures. One result, the messaging has been ghastly, dominated by the most draconian and punitive bans, unquote.
Mm-hmm.
Now consider the case of Tim Alberta, who was out on a book tour last year. His new book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism, is about how his home church reacted after his previous book, which was published in 2019, had been, quote, unflattering, unquote, to Donald Trump. This is from Raw Story, November 28th, 2023. Quote, MAGA fans attacked Christian reporter at father's funeral for unflattering Trump book. Tim Alberta, an evangelical Christian journalist who got his start at the conservative National Review, thinks something has gone seriously off the rails for many of his fellow evangelicals in the age of Donald Trump. In an excerpt of his new book published in The Atlantic, Alberta details how he was accosted by MAGA fans at his own father's funeral over a recent book he'd written containing unflattering revelations about former President Donald Trump that had been criticized by the late Rush Limbaugh on his radio show in 2019. Although some of the remarks people made to Alberta were done in jest, he said that others were overtly hostile in a way that left him shaken. One man questioned whether I was truly a Christian, Alberta writes. Another asked if I was still on the right side. All while Dad was in a box 100 feet away. It got to the point where I had to take a walk. Here in our house of worship, people were taunting me about politics as I tried to mourn my father, unquote. Every one of these stories makes us want to scream. There are dozens of such stories, maybe hundreds. Conservatives who are still in the media passing themselves off as experts on politics and religion who have conservative Christian somewhere in the first line of their biography, who suddenly notice now that it's 30 years too late that their church is a cult of racist, rage-drunk assholes who use scripture to perfume their hatred the way drunks use breath mints and deflection to cover up their alcoholism.
Yup. And the next up is the late Michael Gerson, who was a nationally syndicated columnist who appeared twice weekly in the Washington Post from 2007 until his death in November of 2022. He was the author of Heroic Conservatism and co-author with Peter Wehner of City of Man, Religion and Politics in a New Era. And more about Peter Wehner in a minute, I promise you. And listen carefully for the words National Review. Gerson appeared regularly on PBS NewsHour. He's sort of the break glass in case David Brooks ain't here guy, so they brought him on there. He was on Face the Nation, other programs, and was about as hard right conservative evangelical as you were ever likely to find in Washington political circles. He was one of George W. Bush's most loyal stooges. I used to refer to him as a reliable Beltway stalactite because that's how he came across. He was a speechwriter who came up with the term smoking gun mushroom cloud. Remember that, Blue Gal? Remember smoking gun mushroom cloud to scare the crap out of the public and keep them on Bush's side during the invasion that he lied us into? Remember that?
And Condoleezza Rice went right along with it. Yeah,
she did. Gerson also spent 8 years throwing a long tantrum on the op-ed page of the Washington Post over the fact that Barack Obama existed, that he existed in the world. Everything about Obama just drove him nuts. So he lied about Obama. He lied about Obama a lot. This man of God lied about Obama all the time. And he was forever just about this far from calling Obama uppity in every one of the dozens and dozens of columns he wrote slandering Obama mercilessly for 8 years. Now, I wrote a very long thing about it almost exactly 5 years ago, in fact, on June 13th, 2009. This guy was fucking awful. He was hailed as a saint by a lot of never-Trumpers, and they remember him very, very fondly as a man of God and a real decent guy. I don't dispute that they remember him that way, but he wasn't. He was a fucking awful person. And then along came Trump. And before Trump was elected, Gerson spent months flopping around, demanding answers as to why this abomination was cruising to the nomination of his party, and insisting that evangelicals should steer clear of him because he would pollute their precious bodily fluids because Trump was ignorant and he had bad manners and he was crazy and he was intolerant. So why the hell was he winning? Yeah, good question, Michael. Too bad you didn't have the political savvy to figure this shit out on your own. This is one of Michael Gerson's headlines in 2016. Quote, "If Trump wins, blame Obamacare." Unquote. Yeah, vintage Michael fucking Gerson. Yeah, this particular man of God was a real, frankly, piece of shit. After Trump had won and 2019 rolled around, Gerson all but demanded that Democrats stand down right now on the abortion issue. Just drop it. Because if Trump won again, Gerson advanced the even more despicable lie that it would be because of the, quote, radicalism of the Democratic Party on the issue of abortion, unquote. Now, remember what Charlie Sykes was saying like 7 minutes ago about, yep, the abortion issue is what pushed them over the top, and it won the election for the Democrats. 2019, Michael Gerson saying, no, drop it. The headline of this article, abortion supporters have made Trump's re-election more likely. Quote, one of the largest obstacles to the defeat of President Trump in 2020 election is the radicalism of the Democratic Party on the issue of abortion. By forcing Joe Biden to abandon his support for the Hyde Amendment, which currently prevents funding of abortions through Medicaid, the abortion lobby and activist liberals have taken the first major step towards re-electing Trump, unquote. Just imagine if Democrats had actually been stupid enough to listen to Michael Gerson in 2019, to believe Gerson's narrow medieval perspective that a woman exercising control over her own body is such an extreme act of radical leftism that it may well catapult Donald Trump into a second term because, quote, Biden has made it harder, significantly harder, for cultural conservatives who are disturbed by Trump's cruelty and prejudice to vote for Biden should he be his party's nominee, unquote. But you know what happened? Remember what happened, Blue Gal?
In 2020, Biden actually won the election, everybody.
Biden won the election by 8 million votes. He won it pretty handily. And then came January 6, 2021, and at last there appeared somewhere in Gerson's head the slowly dawning realization that there was something amiss inside the GOP. Of course, punditry is not an exact science, Blue Gal.
But we're learning all the time. Why, just 50 years ago, we would have thought your daughter's illness was brought on by demonic possession or witchcraft. But nowadays, we know that Isabel is suffering from an imbalance of bodily humors, perhaps caused by a toad or small dwarf living in her stomach.
So after once again flopping around looking for a reason and exhausting every other possible explanation, Michael Gerson settled on the one that liberals had been warning him and men like him about for decades. This is Michael Gerson, February 1st, 2021. Quote, "This is a reality that I have resisted naming. The 45th president and a significant portion of his supporters have embraced American fascism." Unquote. Yeah. The penny finally drops. He finally fucking notices what's going on. It has been going on for decades inside his own party, but he still wasn't quite there yet. Now, this is Michael Gerson from the Washington Post, March 1st, about a month later in 2021. Again, quote, "The GOP is now just the party of white grievance. The party has been swiftly repositioning itself as an instrument of white grievance," unquote. Now, you all being very alert listeners, no doubt noticed the use of the word swiftly in that sentence. Now, can we really say that a transformation that's been underway since Gerson was like 6 years old qualifies as, swiftly? Is that really swiftness? I don't think so, but Gerson might have disagreed with me. We never had a chance to debate it. Anyway, Gerson continues, because he blocked me and canceled me. Quote, "It refuses to condemn racists within its congressional ranks. It maintains its main national legislative agenda seems to be the suppression of minority voting. Trumpism is defined by the belief that the real Americans are beset by internal threats from migrants, Muslims, multiculturalists, Black Lives Matter activists, Antifa militants, and various thugs, gangbangers, and whiners. Yet the largest single group within the new GOP coalition is comprised of people who claim to be, wait for it, evangelical Christians. Oh my. And the view of human beings implied by Trumpism is a direct negation, really, of Christian teaching, as well as many other systems of belief. Christians are informed not by political correctness, but by Jesus, that every addict and homeless person you might encounter on a nocturnal walk in New York is the presence of Christ in disguise. And the parable he told in Matthew 25 illustrating this point is a rather stern one. Those who follow their precognitive disgust and refuse to treat the hungry, the stranger, the sick, and imprisoned as they would Christ are told, quote, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels," unquote. Back to Gerson. No one could possibly accuse white evangelicals of consistently defending this view of humanity in the Republican coalition. There have been only scattered peeps of protest as an agenda of dehumanization has advanced. The complete lack of a debate on these matters is an indictment. At some point, the issue ceases to be hypocrisy because hypocrisy requires the existence of a standard, unquote. I've read a lot of Michael Gerson, and let me tell you what I read here. That Gerson is still unable to force himself to fully comprehend what he is seeing. He cannot face the fact that at some point will not cut it anymore, or that this or that act of depravity can be seen as an indictment. The time for indictments is long since over, and the point at which at some point crossed over into this is happening right now was 30 fucking years ago.
Michael Gerson's co-author Peter Weiner is another one. Like David French, Weiner was a writer at, guess where? The National Review.
You're kidding me, Blue Gal.
No, it was just a den of iniquity, Driftglass.
Yep.
He had all the same terrible opinions, worked for many of the same Republican politicians. He wore his conservative fundamentalism on his sleeve. He also spent 8 years relentlessly slagging Barack Obama for failing to overcome the Republican Party's strategy of obstruction and sabotage. Why won't Obama lead?
Why won't he lead, Blue Gal? Why won't Biden lead either?
He just couldn't bring himself to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Do it. The third party, or I just won't vote for it, but I can't do either one. They're both terrible.
And of course, a place was found for him at virtually every mainstream media table.
Of course.
According to Wikipedia, his work has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Commentary, Christianity Today, the Financial Times, National Affairs, Politico, Time, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Weekly Standard. Weiner has appeared on many cable news channels, C-SPAN, and talk radio. He became a contributing editor at The Atlantic and contributing op-ed writer at the fucking New York Times in 2015 because, of course, he did.
But of course he did. There is a club, Blue Gal. There is a
club, Driftglass.
Mm-hmm.
And like Gerson and French and Sykes and Alberta and many, many others, Weiner also managed to notice how deeply warped and hypocritical his cult was after it was decades too late. And after they had flung themselves into the arms of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yep. Now, part of this is human nature. We recognize that. So I'll tell you a story about my dad. My dad was an alcoholic, and my dad died an alcoholic. Now, he died in his 80s, but he died of organ failure and general body collapse from alcoholism. But he was also a science teacher in his 20s and 30s, and he kept insisting as the end was near that the reason his body was quitting on him was formaldehyde he'd inhaled 40 years before, which was clearly bullshit. Had nothing to do with that. That was not the reason. He was in denial until the day he died, but his lying never fooled us, never fooled anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We all knew he was an alcoholic. We all tried in our own ways to mitigate the damage he was doing to himself, and we all failed in our own way. But that's human nature. And we tried, and he was in denial. But his denial was sort of contained to our family, because that's where the analogy fails. The people we're talking about here were all gainfully employed by Team Evil during the decades when the groundwork was being laid for the rise of a monster by Trump, especially among the evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
They had to try really hard not to notice what was going on inside the conservative evangelical movement for decades. These were the subject matter experts on religion and politics. These weren't just nobody bloggers in the middle of nowhere. These were the guys being paid for their expertise. These were the credentialed professionals. These were the trusted authorities that Team Evil sent out into the world to lie about the state of the Republican Party, to reassure the reading public that everything was okay when it patently clear that it was not okay. Clearly something was wrong with the Republican Party during all the years they were telling us that everything was fine. In fact, something was so drastically wrong within the Republican Party that it was getting worse. You could see it every day. You could see it every election cycle. And those of us outside the party could not only see it, we wrote about it every damn day. And then at some point, a very small number of these people reacted to something Trump did. Maybe it was a lie that was just one lie too many or one lie too big, or some depravity that was too disgusting for them to choke down and keep silent about. But something happened that made them go, that's just too much. And that was the point at which they were out. Overnight, kicked out of everything. They were canceled. They were unpersoned. They were just another commie libtard who'd never been one of us in the first place, never been one of the team. And suddenly they were in Liberalville, Blue Gal. Suddenly they were looking for a place to land. And next thing you know, these people were all over liberal media like a fucking rash. In media companies that never seemed to have the time or the budget to platform, actual liberals. Suddenly there was plenty of room and plenty of money for expat conservatives who'd been calling this baby-killing scum just, 5 minutes before. And the excuse these subject matter experts and credentialed professionals and trusted authorities offered was always the same, that they never knew about any of the hinky shit on the right that was going on right in front of them. They never saw anything. They'd never been in any of the meetings. They'd never been on the email threads. They never were on the conference calls. They were never in the Zoom meetings. They never read anything about anything being amiss inside the Republican Party. They were, in other words, completely innocent because they were completely ignorant.
So at the risk of repeating ourselves, and we are going to repeat ourselves, we're going to let Diana Butler Bass's Twitter thread have the last words.
Mm-hmm.
Again, quote, "Welcome to my life for the last 30 years. This is what evangelicals do. Always. They cancel people. It just takes privileged conservative guys a while to notice, I guess."
Mm-hmm.
He literally just said there are churches where you can't be a Democrat. This has been happening for 30 years. Geez, he didn't know this? There are millions of people who have experienced this. Evangelicalism has ruined so many lives. Also, maybe he should memorize that Niemöller quote, "First they came. Finally, I'm all for prodigal sons and deathbed conversions. If, however, your job is public commentary on religion, you shouldn't be so clueless." Unquote.
What can we say, Blue Gal, but amen?
Amen.
Amen to that.
Don't forget, we really need more Patreons to make this podcast fly. So if you can spare $5, please spare $5. And visit our Patreon at patreon.com/proleftpod. And thank you for that. We'll see you next time.
And see you next time.
The Professional Left podcast, No Fair Remembering Stuff Tuesday edition, is recorded under a Creative Commons license. Copyright 2024-25 DGBG Productions.